If each period of, say, 5 years brings about an indie RPG that is representative of the zeitgeist of the time, then perhaps Lancer can fill that role for the early 2020s. There is, of course, the mediocrity that is Shadow Dark, that represents the post-OGL exodus from Dungeons & Dragons 5e, glomming on to the nearest game that can have some faux old-school cred, while also being devoid of any potential problematic content that might result from playing games actually made by white men from the 1970s and 80s. That is D and DBX. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about Lancer, the lantern light that attracts moths of many colors. Most of them a veritable rainbow themselves, if you catch my drift. Yes, we don't really know what happened to the Forge-mites of the 2000s, the last gasps of the hipsters, the genuinely fun story game that was Apocalypse World, and the genuinely insufferable people who played it and stole its ideas for lesser echoes such as Dungeon World or Monster of the Week. We don't know what happened to them, but we do know that many of them came to enjoy Lancer, a game about communists in mechs made by megacorporations performing a far-future Bolshevik purge of all surrounding star systems that do not want to be gay space communists. It is Battletech RPG, but for people who want their mechs to look artsy and unique. And indeed, the mech art, as well as a few of the mech concepts, are the only good thing Lancer has to offer. Mechanically, it attempts to split up play between minimalistic character rules and in-depth rules for mech combat, which is, of course, why you chose to play the game. So this cannot be criticized. Or can it? Well, as it turns out, the mech rules may be less complex than Battletech RPG, but they certainly do their best to hide that fact. Behind an avalanche of jargon that makes the bizarre, abstract abilities, many of the mechs have even further obfuscated. This is not to say the game is difficult. Before some smug or screaming Lancer fan pulls out their dilator to call anyone who complains about the game rules a moron who can't understand a relatively basic game. It is more that the abilities are needlessly complicated and the book is badly organized. The combat runs very slow, which perhaps is fitting for mech combat and for those who want in-depth mech game. But this was on par with D&D 4e. Of course, for a game so focused on miniature combat, one would not want to bother breaking out miniatures for a battle that will be resolved by stationary platforms vaporizing all their foes at infinite range with missiles. But the opposite extreme isn't much desirable either. Speaking of D&D, this game uses its boost system, where you add D6s to your D20 roll as a sort of advantage, but only add one of those D6s, with multiple boosts simply being rolling more D6s, but only keeping the best roll, which is like some attempt to mimic bounded accuracy from D and D5e and the advantage system from D and D5e, while trying really hard not to be D and D5e. Don't misinterpret this as an assertion that D and D5e invented the concept of bounded accuracy. It didn't. Far from it. But these game designers operate under recency bias and popularity bias, and D&D 5e is the most popular RPG ever, most likely, and not just because the brand name. However, to get bogged down in the mechanics of this game would be to miss the point. While the rules are mediocre, and the damage system vaguely elicits suspicion of a Starfinder RPG ripoff in some ways, the real issue with Lancer is the setting. A setting where there are basically no consequences, at least for the PCs. See, if your mech is destroyed in combat, no worries. You can just 3D print another one. One wonders how the hell war even happens in a setting like this that is very deliberately post-scarcity, but we'll get to that. Losing mechs in battle doesn't hurt you. In fact, it's not even likely to kill your pilot. Even if your pilot is reduced to 0 hit points, they only have a 1 in 6 chance of actually being dead. They could, of course, die voluntarily, as that is an option, one of the stupidest fucking concepts ever introduced to RPGs, and really goes to show the kind of game this is, one where you are really, in the subtext, in the innuendo, not supposed to die without the player's explicit consent, and only when it makes for a really good story. These people do not want to play a game. They want to tell a story they have already pre-planned, and have the dice agree with them, no matter how many times they have to re-roll them. But that's an aside. The point is that mech combat bears very little actual consequence. Unless the game master is being an asshole and deliberately striking down mechs to finish off the pilot, a tactically stupid decision in most cases anyway, at least while there are other targets still standing, dying in mech combat is quite unlikely unless it overheats or something and explodes. But truly, it is Lance's setting that makes it so insufferable. It is your typical sci-fi far future where mankind has colonized the stars, and under the banner of a united government called Union, not at all a reference to the Civil War. Although the American Union these Antifa LARPers so lovingly verbally fellate, without understanding that they would all be bombarded with a panoply of slurs were they ever to wander into a camp actually populated by their supposed heroes, at least never sank to what Union is in Lancer. It is basically gay space communism. It is lame. Everything is 3D printed. It's post-scarcity. And of course, like all communism, it is necessarily colonial so as to stamp out any competing ideology outcompeting it. And of course, the failures of communism in this world are easily explained away by the tech level reaching a pinnacle of perfection. Like the Bolsheviks, this movement requires constant warfare. And while the book does admit that Union often brings death to far-off worlds before any benefit, it also seems resolute in the moral unambiguity of its righteous crusade. Except they wouldn't use that word, because that involves white men winning a war, so it is verboten, even though they eventually lost. Still, that is what they mean. Lancers, it says, are mech pilots from all backgrounds, including those with criminal histories. Of course, this is a classic trope of RPG character backstories, but knowing that the writers of Lancer are gay communists, it seems more like a jab at business owners not wanting to hire criminals to manage their cash registers. Everyone deserves a second chance. And that includes ex-cons being given the controls of cutting-edge robotic death machines. There's also a cute little section about how Lancer might contain triggering topics like the seizure of indigenous land, which is only acceptable when done by Bolsheviks against white Europeans, but they leave that subtext out. It is implied. They also suggest you utilize the X card, which you should know what that is if you are watching these videos in the first place. And of course, the wonders of imaginary technology made possible by science fiction must be utilized to enable transgenderism and other gender-skirting mental illnesses. This is all a foreword to the lore section of the book, where Earth was implied to have been destroyed by global warming, and then humanity set out into the stars. Union's creation is stated clearly to have been the consolidation of multiple calendar systems into a single one. A great reset, year zero, a brave new world. Yes, this all sounds very progressive. The art, of course, contributes, showing characters enjoying stir-fry and noodles while resting near their mechs, which is, of course, what all these people want role-playing games to be about, having their ramen and boba tea and other classy hipster foods that make them seem so cultured and effete. That's fine, but of course juxtaposed with large mechs, it looks quite ridiculous, along with the huge number of old fat women and effeminate men of various skin colors. Not that a female character, or old character, or non-white character should be discouraged, but Lancer, of course, prioritizes these to a great degree, and of course, that could be considered to be part of the flair of the game. But in the context, and these leftists do love their context, of the fact that this game is written by people who hate you, and anyone who opposed their gay space communism, and have invented a game where you kill anyone opposed to gay space communism, it seems far more sinister. More about union. Its three core legal pillars are firstly fulfilling the material needs of all, and secondly, having no walls between worlds. This is, of course, an endorsement of the open borders these leftists so desperately crave for whatever reason. Probably so they can get more tacos and Korean barbecue. Food is all that matters to these idiots after all. Finally, it demands an end to all debt, which is pretty hilarious given the general result of socialistic policies on government revenue. All in all, a cringeworthy endorsement of modern leftist ideals. Remember, no human shall be held in bondage to labor or debt, and if they disagree with that, you kill them with your giant space gun. What an absolute joke. The game starts in a world where the Union government has just defeated an ideology called anthrochauvinism, thus moving into a new level of progressivism. Apparently, even being humanocentric is too much now, which is even more bizarre, given that there is no mention of intelligent aliens in Lancer at all. The trigger warning SJW section even explains that, as being intended to avoid an easy target for othering and passing off stories of enslavement onto non-humans to make it easier, or something. This is all hilariously hypocritical. Lancer is genuinely a mess, an attempt at Star Trek utopia that is sinisterly evocative of Bolshevism. Best to avoid it.